Hello and welcome to Focus on Israel, which looks at the Holy Land. I'm Paul Calvert.
Psalm 110 from the New King James Bible says this: "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, a good understanding of all those who do his commandments. His praise endures forever."
I'm with Stephen Jaffe from Northern Ireland Friends of Israel. Now, Stephen, the UK has seen terror on the streets in Manchester and London. How are the Jews feeling at the moment in the UK?
Well, Paul, firstly, thank you so much for the platform, because I think it is a very crucial time for the Jewish community, not just in the UK, but globally. So you've mentioned the headline points. Jews have lost their lives going to synagogue on the Day of Atonement in Manchester, England. We've had stabbing attacks in Golders Green, northwest London. You have to look behind the headlines to see the apprehension and fear across the Jewish community in the UK. This is mums and dads who worry about their kids going to school in the morning if they have a Jewish school uniform. It's about worrying about being visibly seen to be Jewish when you're on the streets in a British city. So it goes beyond and beneath the surface headlines to, a sense of deep apprehension within the Jewish community in the UK at the moment.
This must be really scary for a family, for a mother taking her children to school, but not knowing whether you could get attacked on the way to school.
Indeed. And what I think our neighbours, when they come across, you walk down Golders Green, the main Jewish area of northwest London, you will see security guards outside schools. Those kids are drilled as to what to do in the event of a terror attack. From the age of 4 and 5, they're being told how to respond. You can imagine the feeling of fear and isolation as anti-Semitism surges in terms of recorded incidents. It becomes murderous in that people's lives are now at stake. We've seen arson attacks on synagogues. So you are absolutely right to bring this up, Paul, that this is a bit of a shock for the Jewish community. And I do believe it should be a shock to the wider community as well, including our Christian brothers and sisters here in the UK.
So with all this security, does it feel like you're living a little bit in a ghetto now?
Well, we sort of get used to it, Paul, and this is a fact of life for us and has been for quite a while. Again, walked on Golders Green on a Shabbat morning, on a Saturday morning where the services are going on in synagogues up and down the Golders Green Road. It looks like a community under siege. We've got security guards, we've got members of the congregation who take it in turns to do security rota. We've got an organisation called the Community Security Trust, and they have patrols going up and down the Golders Green Road on a Shabbat morning. So yes, it's a sense of siege, it's a sense of isolation. And I would call upon our Christian friends in particular to reach out at this time to actually make contact with the Jewish community and say a very simple message. We see what's going on, we don't like it, and we stand with you. That very basic act of solidarity, I think, is so important right now, alongside prayer, alongside that friendship, which I know exists within the Christian community. Now is the time to be visible and to be seen in terms of solidarity with the Jewish community.
Yeah, very important. Now, terrorists will know that Jews go to synagogue on a Saturday. So are some people actually not going to synagogue at the moment because there's too much pressure and too much fear? And are people actually sitting in synagogue in fear while they're worshipping God because, anything could happen at any moment?
So I would say that the picture is more complex than that. People get on with their everyday lives as best they can, but lurking at the back of their minds is an apprehension when they're attending synagogue, for example. I don't want to... And firstly, the Jewish community is quite diverse as well, that we don't all think the same way about politics or about what's happening even here in the UK. But I think the underlying sentiment is one of a deep apprehension, with the majority of Jews, Paul, here in the UK, asking the question, do we have a long-term future in this country? So this conversation is going on around dinner tables on Friday night or Eve of Shabbat meals. It's a general sense, but I don't want to give the impression that Jewish life has come to a standstill and our synagogues are empty and our cultural events are not happening. We're trying to maintain a surface level of normality, but speak to people, engage with them, and you will begin to understand things are not okay.
Are you shocked that the Intifada that was in Israel has actually came to the UK?
Well, not entirely, because the cry has been loud and clear since October the 7th, indeed before, globalise the Intifada. That is what is being proclaimed on our streets, and regular anti-Israel marches from the river to the sea. That is about the elimination of the State of Israel. Globalise the Intifada is about bringing the violence of the Middle East onto our streets here in the UK. So I'm not altogether surprised. The government here in the UK, I think, has been very slow to call out the extremism and the hate which exists on the anti-Israel side. I'm not saying that you cannot criticise the Israeli government, that people don't have the right to protest, but there are red lines. And our government, I think, has been very slow to call out that extremism. It's been allowed to fester, to grow. It's encouraged extremists. And I think this is something which has to change very urgently indeed.
Do Jews in the UK feel this will get worse? And are they actually hiding their Jewish identity at the moment?
I think on the day-to-day level, yes, I'll personalise it. When I get up walking in the centre of London, I wear a kippah, I wear the Jewish prayer hat. But I'm often thinking, do I cover it up? Do I put it in my pocket? Do I wear a hood or something that's not clearly Jewish? And often I will. You know, if I'm going into boarding a tube train, I look inside the carriage to see, do I think there's a risk in there? So, yes, people are being, I think, much more careful. Young people, I think there's a lot of incidents of anti-Semitism that are now being recorded at school level, at university and colleges. And people will think, yes, it's not safe to be visibly Jewish on the streets at the moment.
Have you actually experienced any anti-Semitism yourself since October the 7th?
I get a lot of people just walk past and will say Free Palestine, and purely because they say I'm Jewish. Occasionally it's escalated. In other words, I've felt that we're heading very close to a much more serious situation. But yes, I've had to report 2 incidents to the police, and that is not unusual. That would be something that I think many Jewish people have experienced across the UK.
Are many Jews thinking about leaving the UK and coming to Israel?
I think the answer to that is yes. That's a conversation, as I've said. I think a majority of Jews are having, do we have a long-term future here? And where would we go? And I think even, and let's be very blunt about it, Israel is in a conflict zone. It's going through a period of tremendous uncertainty and war. But still, the numbers making Aliyah, emigrating from the UK to Israel, has increased despite that. And I believe a more peaceful situation in the Middle East would intensify it. And we are, as a British Jewish community, losing a lot of our more committed members, our younger members. Many of them are seeing a future outside of the UK, and many of them are going to emigrate. Does that mean there's a mass exodus going on or on the cards? No, I think the Jewish community in the UK regards itself as part of Britain, has been part of British society for centuries. It's a settled community. We're proud of the contribution we make. We know we do have friends in the UK. People often say to me, Stephen, the silent majority is with you. And I think, well, it's time for the silent majority to speak out. So I think there's more than one opinion there. I think we will see an increasing number of Jewish people leaving the country. And I think that's a tragedy for the UK, because I think we will recognise as Jews and Christians that at the heart of anti-Semitism is something deeply spiritual. And if allowed to grow and fester, it is a curse in the society in which anti-Semitism is allowed to grow. And that has an impact on the Jewish community, yes, but also on the community at large. Where anti-Semitism is increasing, society has huge problems. And you can see that biblically. That's going right back to our very origins as a people. But, a secular social scientist will say exactly the same thing, that anti-Semitism is like an indicator of very deep issues in society. And that is where we are at in the UK at the moment. And we can talk about the politics of it, but the human reality is that many in the Jewish community feel very apprehensive about their basic safety and their, ability to continue living, developing and thriving in the UK. And that should be a concern for everybody.
It must be very sad for rabbis in their synagogues as they see more and more people leave. The synagogue community gets smaller and smaller and smaller in very much a similar way that's happened here in Bethlehem, where the Christian community have left. and it's become smaller and smaller. And it's sad that the Jewish community feel that they have to leave.
I believe, yeah, it's sad, and I think it's a huge issue for the UK. I think it's one of the defining issues of our society at the moment. And that goes to the spiritual aspect of it. I believe that once anti-Semitism is rampant and it's growing, you have a society which has huge problems. And here in the UK, we're seeing, political turmoil. The centre parties who've governed the UK for decades are not trusted by a large section of the population. People are turning to the left, turning to the right. There's large crowds on the streets. There's protests. There's huge economic uncertainty. And these are all ingredients towards a crisis situation, which we need to get hold of as a country very, very urgently. It's not unique to the UK. There are issues across Europe, elsewhere as well. And it is a very disturbing time. The Jewish community, I think, is on the front line of it, but I don't think other elements of society are somehow immune. I think this is something that we face together. I know many Christians in the UK feel that they are under attack, that their biblical values are not respected, or disrespected, I should say, and that they also feel that it's an urgent time for them. So my basic message to both the Jewish and the Christian communities that we need to stand very closely together as we face these common challenges.
Is the media partly to blame for all of this?
Well, enormously. Enormously. I think the sort of liberal left-leaning media in the UK has amplified the hatred and extremism on our streets through their agenda-driven reporting. So I think this is a huge aspect that you're right to bring it up, because I think the BBC, for example, is a broadcasting corporation that we all pay for. If you pay for the license, you're paying for it. So we're contributing to an agenda-driven media which is hostile to Israel, has shown that again and again, and is, I think, whitewashing the extremism and the hostility in the anti-Israel camp in the UK. So I think they have an enormous responsibility. I think they have abrogated that responsibility again and again, and that's proven in objective analysis of their coverage of the Middle East. That kind of amplifies communal tensions in the UK. So I think it's an enormous part of the problem.
It seems quite crazy, really, doesn't it, that all this anti-Semitism is putting fear in the Jews so they don't want to stay in the UK anymore, so they'll come to Israel, and that's the very place that these pro-Palestinian mobs don't want them to go to and want them to flee Israel. So where can the Jew go?
Yeah. Well, I've often thought about that, Paul. In the 1930s, they were saying, Jews, you don't belong in Europe, go to your places in Palestine. And now the anti-Semites say, Jews, you are a colonizer, you are alien to Palestine, go back to Poland. So that has always been the way of it, that anti-Semitism. You know the history of Jews in the Arab world, how they were kicked out of countries from Morocco through to Iraq and Iran, beyond the Arab world. And where did they go? They went to Israel. So the very act of anti-Semitism on the part of these Arab governments across the Middle East drove out the Jewish, a very long-standing historic Jewish communities, and they greatly contributed to the development and growth of the State of Israel, the very opposite of what these anti-Zionist entities, let's call them that, would have wanted to see. So it's true that anti-Semitism is deeply irrational in terms of how it conducts itself.
Is the government today doing enough to protect the Jewish community?
Well, I think they say the right things. And for instance, we've had the Prime Minister turn up in Golders Green. We've had the King turn up in Golders Green. If you look particularly at the government, they're prepared to give grants and funding towards the security of the Jewish community so that we can build our walls even higher and have, even more security. But where I think they fall down is they're not addressing the causes of anti-Semitism. They're not looking at that hate repeated on our streets. They're not addressing the issue of anti-Semitism within large elements of the Muslim community, within the hard left in the UK. They're not looking at that and addressing that as the core issue. They're more dealing with the symptoms in terms of increasing security. But until they look at the actual causes of this, that's an inadequate response.
Is anti-Semitism a spiritual thing? And if it is, does that mean Christians and Jews need to pray more for protection, for God's hand to cover the Jewish community?
Well, I think this goes back a very, very long way. This idea of anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews, cursing of Jews, that goes back to Abram being told by God at the very, very beginnings of the Jewish people, your future is going to be one of people blessing you and people cursing you, and that this has consequences. The blessings bring blessings, the curses bring curses. So it is deeply spiritual. In the New Testament, Paul is talking to a Christian community and saying, don't be arrogant to the root. He understood at that time in the book of Romans that the church was susceptible and vulnerable to anti-Semitism because of its origins, coming from Jewish origins. So yes, it is deeply spiritual, and it has huge consequences for society at large, and I would say for the soul of the church itself, if it's not prepared to stand up loudly against anti-Semitism. It has a tendency to corrupt, and many people look back to Germany in the 1930s and acknowledge, apart from, exceptionally brave individuals, many in the church were actually silent at that time, and that silence bred absolute disaster, not just for the Jewish people, which it did, but also for Germany, in terms of the war and the world war and the global war and millions upon millions of people dead. That is what's at stake with anti-Semitism. It corrupts society when it's allowed loose, when it's growing, when it's surging. It is symptomatic of huge issues, divisions, and I believe at origins it is deeply, deeply spiritual.
So the Christian community can put some of those wrongs right today by standing with the Jewish community and helping them today during a same period of time as in the 1930s.
I think it's an absolute crucial moment for the church, if I can be as blunt as that, and say, this is the time you've got to speak out. This is the time you've got to stand up and move outside the silent majority and actually give leadership. And that can be a simple matter. I mean, your audience will know the power of prayer, and I encourage and urge them to pray for the security and safety for their Jewish neighbours. The mum and dad are sending the kids to a Jewish school, that they should know comfort at this time and feel much more safe. Beyond the prayer, beyond the sentiment, I want to encourage people to actually act. And that can be a simple thing as emailing your local synagogue saying, we know what's going on, we see it, we're not blind to it as Gentiles, and we stand with you. And we want to show that support and friendship. I think it's now time to move away from a quieter support to a much more visible support. And I'd like to pay tribute to many ministries out there who are working to bring Jews and Christians more closely together in respect and friendship, and to encourage Christian people to take part in those ministries, whether it's Christian Friends of Israel, whether it's Christians United for Israel, International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem. There are many different ministries out there which they can get involved in and support, and I think that's a crucial thing to do at this time.
What is your prayer for the Jewish community in the UK?
Well, I believe it's a prayer for the nation, a prayer for the UK, that the Jewish community should feel safe, secure, and that is an important matter for the nation and not just the Jewish community. That people should, I think, be aware of the need to pray, and to pray very strongly for the soul of the British nation, which I believe is a crucial time. And the anti-Semitism that we're seeing is a part and parcel. It's at the core of the crisis that the country is facing. So I would urge people to pray along those lines and to consider very prayerfully how they can help in practical terms regarding the Jewish community. If they want to help Jewish organisations, a couple that come to mind are the Community Security Trust, which monitors anti-Semitism in the UK and physically protects the Jewish community. They can support that financially. There's also the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which is a grassroots organisation which is campaigning against anti-Semitism. So they can support those organisations very, very practically.
You're part of Northern Ireland Friends of Israel. What's your Facebook page for people to get in contact with you if they want to know more?
Yes, so please do contact me through the Northern Ireland Friends of Israel Facebook page. They can search Northern Ireland Friends of Israel. It will come up. Please do get in touch through that. And like the page, and please like our content. Give us a follow. It would be much appreciated. It's a small grassroots group, but we're part of a wider movement which is bringing together Jews and Christians and people of good faith from whatever background who wish to stand with Israel and the Jewish community at this time.
Well, Stephen, thank you very much for sharing today.
It's been, I can't say it's a pleasure because the topic is quite grim, but it has been a huge privilege for the platform that you've given me, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for joining us today. Pray that God will move by his mighty power in the Holy Land and bring his peace.